It's no secret that Game Freak and Pokemon Company want Pokemon fans to love and revere Charizard. While obviously many people do, the games stand in the way of realizing the true potential they themselves present to increase that adoration tenfold. Let's talk about it. This may break some people's brains a little bit, but I'm about as far from what any reasonable Pokemon fan would call a Gen 1er. I never lapsed as the series continued to grow and advance. I don't, nor have I ever felt a particular allegiance toward any generation or region or any specific Pokemon hailing from them. In other words, you'll never catch me saying that Pokemon designs fell off after Gen 1. Yet and still, Charizard is easily my favorite Pokemon. There's no correlation or causation involved. I just think Charizard looks cool, and I'm obviously not alone in that. When thinking about the hundreds of Pokemon, if I ask people, diehard fans or not, to name the Pokemon they believe are the most popular overall, Charizard would be towards the top, if not at the top, of many of those lists. And that's not just anecdotal. It literally was voted the most popular Generation 1 Pokemon in the official popularity poll conducted by Pokemon Company in 2020. Game Freak evidently has known this for some time, and we can tell by the sheer amount of love they give Charizard in terms of new forms, the fact that most games provide some way to get a Charizard relatively easily. It's an anime and manga favorite, with multiple high-profile trainers using one as their ace Pokemon, including but not limited to Red, Ash, Kiawe, and it's the most popular Pokemon with Elite Four champions, with Lance and Leon both having one on their team, as well as two other members, one of which being the aforementioned Red. The trading card game is perhaps the most on-the-nose way to gauge the value of Charizard, with most cards ranging from being worth hundreds to hundreds of thousands of dollars. If we look to Pokemon that get picked for games outside of the mainline releases like Pokken or Smash, Charizard is always present and accounted for. Funnily enough, it's his appearances in all of those other mediums that has convinced me that the Pokemon RPGs do Charizard, and by extension every other Pokemon in existence, a huge disservice by existing in the way that they currently do. What do I mean by that? Well, let's look to the source material to compare and contrast how Charizard is described versus how Charizard is depicted in the gameplay. First up, Charizard's first ever Pokédex entry from Pokemon Red and Pokemon Blue.
Spits fire that is hot enough to melt boulders, known to cause forest fires unintentionally.
So obviously Charizard spits fire, and that is represented in the games by way of the fact that it is obviously a fire type Pokemon, and is currently capable of learning 18 of the existing 42 fire type moves in the game. So that much checks out, but what's missing is any sort of indication of how hot this fire should be in comparison to other Pokemon or any other fire that may be in the game. Furthermore, there certainly isn't anything in the gameplay that alludes to Charizard starting forest fires or anything like that. And sure, something like this could easily be seen as a throwaway detail that doesn't mean much. In fairness, there are a lot of Pokemon that are capable of breathing fire, significantly more than even the obvious suspects being the well over 70 fire type Pokemon that we have to date, most of which I'm sure are capable of doing so at some pretty high temperatures. What most of these Pokemon don't have that Charizard does have, however, is 20 different Pokédex entries that emphasize this detail in its design. The Pokédex is literally an encyclopedia on Pokemon characteristics and traits. Something like this being repeated in that context is, or at least should be, a means to double down on what is clearly meant to be seen as a defining aspect of a given Pokemon. This is where the games could be setting themselves up to score big, but just end up dropping the ball. And the underrepresented quirks and qualities of Charizard don't end there either. Let's look at one final Pokédex entry via Pokemon Ruby and Pokemon Sapphire.
Charizard flies around the sky in search of powerful opponents. It breathes fire of such great heat that it melts anything. However, it never turns its fiery breath on any opponent weaker than itself.
We never really see that level of sentience and autonomy of Pokemon beyond maybe in battle when a trainer doesn't have enough badges to earn their loyalty and may loaf around, use a different attack, or even straight up go to sleep. I think that's a major missed opportunity for a true truly impressive industry-leading game feature or set of game features. Imagine the believable challenge, tension, and shareable moments you could have with Charizard if the reason you had a hard time catching it was because it didn't respect any of your Pokemon on your team enough to stay for a battle. Or once you eventually do capture it, you struggle to gain its trust enough for it to do any of its fire attacks, or even attack at all based on the Pokemon in question, a system that would be removed from the pre-existing gym badge system. Pokemon Legends Arceus has shown me that while the information seen in the Pokédex is definitely meant to be seen as something that is directly sourced from the world, it isn't necessarily meant to be something that's universal fact that should be applied to every Pokemon in a species. Like, sure, the researcher that wrote the Charizard entries we have right now likely encountered a Charizard with these qualities, but there's nothing in any of the source material that indicates that yours or one you find can't be different from what is depicted in the Pokédex. If this was illustrated more often and more directly in the gameplay of Pokemon games, that would create yet another opportunity for growth in the Pokemon series in regards to the gameplay loop, because then we'd have incentive to observe Charizard with different temperament than the first one we've seen or caught in our journey. I'll give you that for most of the history of Pokemon games, the Pokédex only really served as flavor text and probably wasn't meant to be taken literally. But what I won't concede is that being the case means that's all it should stand for moving forward, especially after having a game that proves the Pokédex can play a much more significant role in terms of gameplay. Just look to Pokemon Legends Arceus for proof of how much depth the Pokédex can add to the gameplay experience. It's the entire backbone of that game, and people are loving it. I have no doubts in my mind that the love shown by fans for what that game does would be amplified by a lot if the things written for the Pokédex manifested in the gameplay of Pokemon games moving forward. There's a lot more room for growth for the series overall once the Pokédex starts to translate to gameplay elements. Like I'm sure many of you, I see a lot of people calling for change in Pokemon games, and almost all of these complaints point to other games in the adventure, action, or RPG genres to try to use them as their supporting evidence for why Pokemon games need to do better. But there's more than enough to go from with what the mainline Pokemon games, frankly, incorrectly tell us about themselves. How much cooler, or hell, three-dimensional could Charizard be in Pokemon games if Game Freak chose to implement things that other mediums do with Charizard to make it the same in those iterations of it? Well, one thing I had in my notes for this video has already been accomplished in Pokemon Legends Arceus, and that's allowing for differences between each individual Charizard beyond differences in stats through things like IVs or EVs. In the anime, it's established relatively early on that Pokemon can be drastically different in terms of size. This is a key new feature in Arceus, so we're partially already there in this sense. Pokemon Sword and Shield, as well as Arceus, dips their toes into illustrating differences in temperament in the wild, but this is an area that, while they're on the right path and they have all of the necessary building blocks to reach the next end point, they haven't reached the full potential of this concept just yet. In Pokemon Sword and Shield, the difference in temperament was primarily illustrated by whether wild Pokemon charge at you or run away, and at what speed. In Arceus, that's extended a bit with some Pokemon choosing to attack or flee from trainers. A common issue here, though, is all of this behavior is tied to the species of Pokemon, which I think is an unnecessary flattening of the characters at best, or a contradiction at worst. For what's been nearly 2 decades, every Pokemon has come part and parcel with a nature, a single adjective describing their general disposition, and a characteristic, a short sentence summing up a prominent habit of a given Pokemon. Worse still, what little personality is there is all but removed from your Pokemon when it's not in the wild or in a feature like Pokemon Camp. Again, the current Pokédex seems to paint all Charizard and Pokemon at large as a monolith in terms of their temperament or even their habits, but what if there's a chance that your Charizard shirks that trend? Because we know that Charizard could be modest in nature, but the Pokédex currently contradicts that. Or again, look to the anime and the manga for different examples of Charizard with different personalities, with Ash's Charizard being the most famous and, in my opinion, exciting potential for inspiration. When Ash's Charmeleon initially evolved into Charizard, it definitely displayed a trait that is consistent with current games, being its general respect for Ash, who wasn't his original trainer. During the period of time prior to Ash earning his Charizard's respect, it was more true to the personality that the Pokédex describes, only choosing to battle when it deemed a potential opponent worthy. After this time passed though, Charizard has become one of Ash's most loyal Pokemon, listening to Ash's every request without hesitation. Or look to a more recent example being Leon's Charizard, a Pokemon that has been depicted in the Galar region edition of the Evolutions animated short, comforting Leon after noticing how visibly shaken his trainer was after reflecting on what was clearly a traumatic experience for him. Kiawe's Charizard, on the other hand, has a mostly standard personality through and through, but it does have the unique quirk of actually liking water, with the anime showing him in a hot spring and his trainer saying it enjoys taking long baths. We don't get to see differences like that in the games, but I personally believe that we could, and honestly probably should. Obviously, or maybe it's not obvious if you never looked into competitive Pokemon battles, as they stand now, natures and characteristics are what the game uses to make a Pokemon's IVs apparent to the player in a way that doesn't entirely break the kayfabe of the world. But again, why stop there? Those natures and characteristics can and should be even more visually apparent in a way that is even more diegetic than just a short written blurb. It should inform how a Pokemon behaves. That doesn't just serve a superficial purpose like being able to see a Pokemon carry itself a bit differently in terms of its animations either. It also serves multiple potential gameplay purposes as well. None of these things could realistically fit into the games the way they're all currently structured, and certainly not considering how they're developed on a strict timeline. I mean, look at the fact that we're already seeing Pokemon Scarlet and Pokemon Violet being announced and rolled out at the end of the year. Some may present that as a reason to excuse the discrepancies in the game's lore and the game's gameplay, but to me, it's more reason for Game Freak and Pokemon Company to expand the scope of Pokemon games to facilitate characteristics like the ones described in the flavor text they themselves write, because these characteristics and quirks are exactly what could make Pokemon more than just another set of generic JRPG monsters. Moreover, they're what can elevate Pokemon as a series to being a marquee gaming moment that is revered for more than just being another entry in a long-running commercially successful franchise. Charizard alone has enough untapped depth and other potential that could be naturally extrapolated on if Game Freak and Pokemon Company were to invest in doing so. I'm here to propose less of a path or step-by-step guide on how to change, but more of a case for why there should and could be change that isn't just, well, other companies do it, it's 2022, or whatever other trite anecdote fans and haters alike throw around from time to time. And like I'm sure you noticed, this video isn't meant to detail every new system that could rectify these problems in painstaking detail. However, I'm also not here to just point my finger at problems with no clue on how to improve the situation like many on the internet. I do have ideas on how to make Pokemon games the best they could be within reason, and I would like to share them with all of you by way of an entire series of videos we here at Redirect want to make. We have plans to break everything down in deep dives on how to improve every nook and cranny of Pokemon games with custom art and animations for visual aid. We can only do that if we reach and maintain the Patreon funding goal to accommodate the necessary increase in production costs and time needed to make the series at the level we'd want it to be at. If that's something you'd be interested in seeing and helping come to fruition, head over to our Patreon. There's a link in the description to contribute as much as you're willing and able. There we have a selection of membership perks with a range of benefits. As always, you can follow us on all social media platforms linked down below. Most importantly, subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell to be notified when new videos are uploaded here on Redirect. Okay, that's it for me. See you in the next one.